started. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists today. First up, groundbreaking producer Betsy Beers. As the as the longtime producing partner of Shonda Rhimes, Betsy has developed and produced some of the most industry-leading shows on television, including Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, Bridgerton, and most recently, The Residents. Next up is head of music creative and production for Netflix original series, Alex Patsavas. She's overseen the music on all Shondaland shows and throughout her career has supervised the music on hundreds of shows and films, as well as produced dozens of soundtracks. Next, let's welcome Mark Mothersbaugh, the acclaimed composer, performer, author, producer, and visual artist. First came to the attention of the music world as the co-creator and frontman of the seminal new wave band Devo. He most recently composed the music for Shondaland's latest series for Netflix, The Residents. Last but not least, returning to the stage after a brilliant performance, let's welcome back Kris Bowers. The Academy Award-winning filmmaker, Emmy and Grammy-nominated composer, Kris is responsible for the music composed for the Bridgerton series as well as its prequel, Queen Charlotte. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Okay. Well, to kick things off, for the to kick things off, talking about the Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte music, I'd like to ask, fans love these covers on the show. They love them so much. And so I do want to start by asking where the idea for those came from and sort of how the work you started doing with Vitamin String Quartet began.
Well, this is probably you and me. So we've been working together a long time, so I just go, you and me. Just I didn't like with this sweaty little voice there. That was good. So basically one of the goals when we were putting Bridgerton together and in the later stages of developing it and putting it together to film was trying to figure out ways that we could take something which was period, but always have these weird little things about it that almost subconsciously make you feel like you're watching something contemporary, so that anything that sort of feels like it's distant or dusty has a kind of relevance to it. We did it first. The first person we hired actually was our costumer, Ellen Mirajnik, and we did that initially with the design of the costumes. And we've always sort of felt with music has been important on every single one of our shows, obviously. It's a key character and factor with everything Shonda and I've ever done. And this was especially important because we had to figure out a way to, we knew we wanted to work with Kris Bowers, and the music and the score was going to be incredible, and we needed to find something that could be a companion to that would have a kind of modern feeling. And ages ago, Alex had introduced me to this group called Rodrigo y Gabriela, who were from Mexico and were kind of hard rock musicians who were broke and could never get work doing what they loved. So they started going to these fancy resorts and playing the music they loved, but they played it like it was flamenco music. So all these people would be sitting, drinking Mai Tais and having a great time and thinking they were listening to this fabulous music, and they were really listening to, Stairway to Heaven. And we talked about it, and we were both kind of like, wouldn't it be really cool if you could actually take contemporary songs and make them sound like you're in a ball and you're having a great time, and that it would sort of seep in. You'd be in the moment, but you'd sort of seep in and kind of go like, oh, wait a second, I think I know that.
Yeah, I think... I remember having this conversation after reading the first Bridgerton scripts before we saw anything on screen. And I think the way you approach the costumes and the set design, it gives the audience permission to step out of the era. It's a nod to Regency, but it obviously is Ariana Grande or it's, whoever it was. And I think there's something wonderful about that moment of recognition when you think your favorite character is dancing to maybe Mozart or something, quite classical, and it's a song you really know. I think there's something super delicious about that, and it felt like it fit the world.
Yeah, and the Vitamin String Quartet, she was sort of like, yeah, there are people who do this. That this is possible, and the Vitamin String Quartet were amazing. They've been incredible. So, and now you found all this other stuff. So that's the story.
And I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the response to it, and so I mean, I think around every season of Bridgerton, folks are like, "Oh, I'd love to hear these songs, love to hear those songs." And so the question on that is, when was the moment that you realized people were reacting to that particular part of the show and experience of watching it?
Oh, wow. I think it was pretty early.
I think it was probably the day it launched. I mean, honestly, I think there was an immediate response.
Yeah.
And you probably know better than I, like how people responded in the rooms before it launched on service.
It was COVID too.
Right,
So
COVID.
we were all isolated. So I I'm a Luddite basically, so I wasn't on that much of a device situation. So I didn't even know when we launched Christmas that year. It took me friends from Europe starting to call and going like, we're watching this show and it's incredible. And pretty early on, they were like, the music, this like the score is great, but those songs are great too. And that was when it sort of first clicked. So
Yeah. I think probably we'll talk about this later, but I think the Bridgerton spotting sessions were the first that I ever did remote. And it was really a spotting session is when the composer and the producers and music supervisor all get in a room together and really talk through an episode. Well, this was a virtual room, and it was
So
really
weird.
something.
it was so freaking weird.
And now it's standard.
And
now
it's like, it's
standard.
really hard to learn how to give people shit on camera. I'm so
it.
good about it in a room. I mean, you both know, like I'm so good at it. And you sort of start being kind of polite, but don't worry, all my barriers are broken down, y'all. It's all good. I can be an asshole on camera too.
And then, Kris, your first show with Shondaland is actually for the people. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about the beginning of your journey with Shondaland.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I've always appreciated about Shondaland is there's this trust and comfortability and safety and permission to fail, even in situations that are kind of high stakes, And I think that it's maybe because they've done this for a while so that they know it sometimes takes a second for a show to get its legs, especially on the music side. And for the people, I remember when I got the call from Paul William Davies about that show, I think at the time I got the call, a large part of the reason I got the call is because they wanted a jazz sound for the show, and my background is primarily in jazz. And if you watch the show, the score is not really like that, and a lot of it's because we tried it and it just wasn't really working very well, and there was a lot of trial and error. And I think that the thing I felt really great about is that that's a situation where, as a composer, especially at the time, that was like one of my first shows, that can definitely cause you to feel nervous about getting fired pretty quickly. And there was just this trust and belief in the fact that we're going to figure it out. And so I think having that comfortability in those conversations with Paul and Betsy, it just made me feel like, and Alex, that we were going to figure it out. And so, once we figured out the sound of the show, then it was just a matter of trying to keep up with the pace for me, which was exciting, but definitely a new thing.
Thank you. And then I wanted to shift gears back to the performance you just did, which was, again, incredible. Yes. Another round of applause. And so the songs were, different. Sorry, I have lost the train of thought. The songs you performed were tied to different couples of Bridgerton, as well as a song tied to Lady Whistledown herself, who we love. The question in that is, when you're building music or composing tied to a specific character, how do you go about doing that, given there's such specificity to the work when you're tying it to a beloved couple or character on a show like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about this show is that the beginning was also trial and error. Like when I came on the project, they talked about wanting to have this music that was different than your typical Regency television show. And my first instinct was to try to write pieces of music that were very much like Beethoven, very much like 1813, and then chop it up into samples and make like hip hop beats out of it. And that was not the right way to go. And then the next attempt was, I thought, well, maybe if we write things that are very much like the time, and then find ways to record it in this very modern way, then that'll feel modern. And then that just felt like it was the music from that time period. And so one of the things that cracked the code was talking to Chris Van Dusen. He had me write a theme for Daphne and Simon while they were still shooting because they needed it for an episode where Daphne was going to play this on piano, and she had this melody in her mind and that she was dreaming about. And he sent me some Ravel piano pieces, and I think that opened my mind to an era I wasn't thinking about. And once we found the sound of the show, I think between that and realizing I could explore any style or genre, and then especially when I first heard the covers, I remember hearing the Thank You Next cover in the first episode and realizing that it created this subconscious connection to these characters because now these people hear a style of music that they know, so they can see themselves in this world a little bit more. And so that caused me to start looking at, modern music to pull from in terms of like melody or rhythm and tempo. So once I have the palette, then it's really just about honestly exploring my own emotions. I think that my wife often says that she can understand me emotionally more when I play piano than when I speak to her. And a lot of that is just because I process emotions through the piano. And so I'll watch these characters and these relationships, and it makes me think about my own experiences with that. And so I think about Daphne and Simon. The thing I loved about that first season is that it was this couple that chose to be together in the beginning. So the whole season was them trying to figure out how to deal with each other's traumas and triggers and all of those things, and pulling the masks down and being comfortable with that. And I just got married that year. So a lot of my experience was, dealing with those things. And so a lot of it is watching these relationships and these scenes. And it makes me feel a certain way. And then I go to the piano, I improvise, trying to re-trigger the same feelings that the show and the writing made me feel and the performances made me feel. And once I find that in improvisation on the piano, I then just kind of play along to the picture to accompany it and build around that.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then, Alex, I did want to ask, can you talk a little bit about your role, your current role at Netflix, and sort of how you work alongside composers like, Kris and Mark?
Lucky me, get to work alongside Kris and Mark. My role at Netflix is different than the role we're going to examine in the later half of, when we talk about sort of our adventure at ABC. But I lead music, creative, and production, and really it's about supporting our showrunners and producers and music talent to make sure that we get the very best music on Netflix for our series. And it might be finding a studio, it might be suggesting a supervisor or composer, or figuring out a place to score. But I always have the music in mind, and I'm lucky enough to work with really great talent across the business.
Absolutely. And then, on speaking of those shows, I do want to talk about The Residents, which was so much fun. Yes.
So much fun.
And
Speaking of jazz.
yes. And it was, Mark, it was your first show working with Shondaland, and it's also the company's first comedy. So I'm sort of curious about what your thought process is in crafting the music and the sound of the show.
I've been around a long time, so I've done quite a few shows at this point, and it was about time that Shondaland hired me. I was kind of like, took a long time for them to
Damn right.
pay attention, but it's like the characters in this show are just so incredible. It's like from the very first, I fell in love with our detective. She's so amazing because she's like a bird watcher, but yet she doesn't take shit from the white guys that are all like trying to, control the situation. And it was just, and all the actors that were cast it was really a great job of casting. And for me, that stuff is all really important when I'm writing music. And I found it to be like really easy on one level, but on another, it was hardest show I've ever done because there was so much music. It's like there was like about 4 feature films worth of music that got written for 9 episodes, which that's never happened. I've done, like close to 100 different TV series, and that nothing like that's ever happened before. So that was, but the great thing is I used this small group of jazz guys that hung out in my studio. We figured out a way where at my writing studio where we could set it up for them to come in a couple times a week and it just became a ritual. And it was like a very amazing project. I just feel so lucky that I got to be part of it.
Absolutely. It's also such a love letter and to murder mysteries, and so many references are in the show. And so I am curious about how you go about composing music for a show that is such a love letter to a genre like that. Like, how does that sort of impact the work?
Oh, well,
That's you.
well, it was so lucky because Paul, who was in charge of things, he loved jazz and let me know that from the very beginning. And so I loved working with jazz artists. It's different than you work with an orchestra, and they can play incredible, things on paper first time. They see them one time and they look at them, and then you got 80 people playing perfect, and it's amazing. And then rock people, they like are sloppy, and they improvise. It's part of their nature, but it's two different sides of the brain. And because for rock guys, you're writing A minor, seventh, E flat. You're just putting chords on a paper form. And the jazz people have both sides of their brains, and it's like these guys, when they'd come in and work with me, I'd put up the show on the screen so they could see what they were playing to, and they'd make suggestions like, "Hey, you want me to try this right when she opens the door?" And I'd be like, "Yeah," and then they'd play it, and I go, "Yeah, that's what I meant to do. Yeah, that's." And they just love the process, and they become much more integrated into it than you get sometimes. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. One of the things that I think people responded to that was, in addition to the great music of the show, is Kylie Minogue being on The Residents.
Oh, yeah.
And so the question in that is, how did that come about, and how did you go about choosing what songs she would do?
Well.
Well.
Oh, well.
Oh, well, well. First of all, she was written into the script. So the deal is, obviously, for all of you who've seen it, if you haven't, please, God, watch it. But I think one of the jokes was that there are obviously these entertainers who are stuck overnight at the White House, and we wanted, and Paul, the creator of the show, wanted real people, because in an ideal world that would be much more impactful. So he wrote Kylie Minogue into the script, and we called Alex and said, "Alex, how do we get Kylie Minogue to read the script?" And
then we sent it to her. And obviously, for those who haven't seen it, how much can I reveal? Are we doing spoilers tonight? All right, good. No.
Yeah.
There is a state dinner.
that this is just the plot.
Right.
I think you're good with that.
All right. There's the.
This one, nothing was spoiled except the food.
Nothing was
Okay.
spilled except
Yeah.
for the Australian state dinner.
Yeah.
And obviously, we needed an amazing, iconic pop star.
And Hugh Jackman, who we couldn't get.
And Hugh Jackman, we
tried.
couldn't get. We just reached out to Kylie. She was really interested in it. It was a little complicated. Obviously, she's a busy icon with the Vegas show and her touring schedule, but we were able to bring her in and make it work. I think she shot for, 2 weeks?
Yeah, not consistently, but yes, yeah, about that.
Sort of 2 weeks. And I think it was important to make sure we had something really, really recognizable and also something newer. And that's how we got to the songs.
Yep. And it was timed well with her new album.
And she's very fun.
She's really fun. That woman is a party in a box. Just going to say.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And then on that note, we are going to say goodbye to Mark and Kris. So let's thank you very much, both of you, for sharing your time with us. Let's give them a round of applause.
exactly.
And then there were three. Um, but, to got it. Alrighty. Now I do want to take a trip back to the beginning, Betsy. So if you wouldn't mind, sort of sharing what stands out to you from the beginning of your work at Shondaland, and also the part of your job that involves all of this incredible music.
What stands out about
The beginning, yeah.
the very, very beginning of just working at Shondaland?
Yes.
Because there was no Shondaland. It was just Shonda, me, in a room. So it was Shondaland, but it was also, yeah. But, yeah, you know, one of the things, obviously, neither of us had ever done a television show before. So what stands out to me now is how steadfastly we pushed for something that we loved so much that nobody thought was good. But we somehow or another just kept faith and pushing. And I think we always do now, and it's not surprising as much as I look back and go like, we did not give up. I mean, we were at every single stage. Grey's Anatomy was a very, y'all probably know this or maybe you don't, but it was something that we were the last script to be picked up to shoot as a pilot for that season. We were the last pilot to be picked up. We were the pilot that got picked up to be half an order mid-season, which during those days in network, which was 2004, 2003, 2004, 2005, was sort of like, you know, shooting your kid in the head because they just didn't work. They placed us, the first debut was Easter Sunday in 2005 at 10 o'clock. That's a sexy fucking time to start a show. You just had chickies and bunnies and run around with your family, and you're going to go watch some people almost lose a patient on the table. And the weird thing was, from the moment we debuted, thanks to, I think, some great publicity from ABC and some folks that really loved it, we actually got pretty good ratings, which I didn't understand at that point because I didn't know how to read ratings. So that's a whole other story I'm not going to bore you with because you'll be here like 5 hours. But we got good ratings, and then every week the ratings would go up. And they were all just baffled. And one thing, we had a wrap party because we actually wrapped the show around the same time it debuted. We had a wrap party a couple weeks later. And those are usually these things for crew and cast. And it was a brand new show. And the veteran guy who was working with us, who was a writer, we're sitting and it's early and the cast are all there and we're all hanging out. It's just us. And he said, okay, you can tell how successful they think the show's going to be by how many executives show up. And the door opened and like the whole freaking studio network showed up. Yeah, right? And we were like, damn, okay. So I think that always just, it amazes me sometimes we got there, but we weren't going anywhere. So.
Did we do 9 episodes for the first year? 10? 9?
No, we did 12, and then they
12.
decided that they wanted to only air 8 in the first season because they wanted the last episode of the first season to be, are you the bitch that's sleeping with my husband? Are you the slut, I think, that's sleeping with my husband? I can't remember. Which was Addison walking. A spoiler alert for any of you who haven't seen Grey's Anatomy. Sorry. Eek. It was this great moment where Addison walks in and she's got on high heels and she does this whole thing, and it's pretty great.
We shot the pilot, the year before?
We shot the pilot the year before.
So 2004. I remember working on the 12 episodes, which turned into 9, the fall of 2004.
Yep.
2005, and being so worried because we weren't going to air. You know, we didn't know, I think, at that point when we were going to air.
Yeah.
And like, when is it going to air? When is it going to air? And then I'm afraid the music is just drying up in the cutting bay and people are going to start to air the songs. And so finally we launched in March. And I remember just sort of wringing my hands, hoping that, you know, our sound was still as unique as we thought it was by the time it aired. And of course it was in retrospect, but I remember having a lot of anxiety around that.
And also you all need to know that when we were shooting, we were casting the pilot, we were working on the pilot. The only person I ended up hiring was Alex, because we had become friends a few years before, and I knew she was a genius. She did the OC, she did all these other I mean, right? And I remember listening to the OC and going like, this person's a genius. And then we went, like, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and we became like fast friends. But the freakiest thing about Alex was, I will tell you all that the first time I met her, we went out to lunch. We're having lunch. It was at the Cat and the Fiddle.
It was.
And
That is now Superba.
which is
for
now
those of you in the
Superba,
modern
so
era.
anybody here who's not a geriatric. So basically, we eat, and she just talks to me over lunch. Like, we're just talking about stuff and getting to know each other. And she says, hey, you know, my studio is right around the corner of the place. Chop Shop's right there. She goes in, and she's talking to me, and she just is looking at me. She's talking. She pulls CDs out of racks.
Remember a CD?
Remember CDs? And she hands me a stack of like 5 CDs, and she goes, I think you'll like these. I mean, it was creepy. Like, I got these CDs home, and they became like my favorite things. They were all people I hadn't heard of. And it was clear, like, the woman could read your mind in this both incredibly engaging and comforting way, but also slightly scary way. And it constantly worked. So she would send these large things we called comps of all of these different songs, and Shonda and I would listen to the songs. And I remember listening to Cozy in the Rocket, driving into work and walking into the area that we all were and looking at Shonda and going like, oh my God, one of the songs on the comp, I think, is this. She said, you know, I heard a song on the comp, and we both went, Cozy in the Rocket by Sap. So it was...
Became the theme.
That became the theme. I know.
Honestly,
Pretty
I've
cool.
been watching that show for so long. I'm just like, I want to hear more stories, but I do have actual questions.
What?
And I know I do.
Just
wanna
wind
ask-
me up, and I'll keep going.
No, but
I got
it's-
22 years to talk about.
But do either of you sort of remember the first song, or maybe one of the early songs that really sort of blew up off the back of being on Grey's?
Think, you know, probably the first songs that really got attention were probably The Fray, right? Chasing Cars and all its iterations. But I also think the music as a piece on Grey's got a lot of attention, like outside of, and of course, Anya Marina, who's here, will join us later.
Yeah, we constantly were placing.
That's, yes. But I think it was how you used music. It was as well as who we used, which was quite unique at the time. We probably used 6 to 8 songs an episode, and they were allowed to play all the way through. They tied together scenes. Like Source's score may now seem regular, but it was rather irregular in those years.
It was, and basically both Shonda and I come from movies, and I'd done this movie with Mark Mothersbaugh called 200 Cigarettes. Like that was my first movie. Oh man. And I learned how to place in that movie because it was wall-to-wall music. And also, having been raised on movies, one of the things we always talked about was people used movies for montage, music for montages in movies. Nobody ever did it for TV. And when you have a show with 58 doctors starring in it, and they all have different storylines, and you want to understand what the theme of the show is, the easiest way to bring it together was music. So it's hard to believe, but nobody had really done it before. So, and for the artists, it was this incredible platform.
And it was a medical drama, so you have to think about probably, audience didn't anticipate they were going to be introduced to so many songs with all the things were so unique. Also, it's the era. We were sort of pre-Spotify, pre all the things, and in order to pre-Shazam. And so I remember we would, cull together a list of all the music that was on the show. We would make sure it was, up on a website. It was just heady times. It was interesting to sort of, I had been supervising since 2005. I started with Roger Corman. So I, worked on a lot of movies that your parents couldn't see, essentially, for a very low budget. And I remember, really understanding the excitement from the music community, from the labels, from the publishers, and really realizing that marketing departments were interested, that we were going to be part of a plan for how an artist reached fans. And it was such heady, interesting stuff then. Now it is part of the plan. Then it was a brand new thing.
And the other piece of it was that we wanted, because the characters were young, we wanted to have music that sounded like they would listen to, and also that were like them, which were young, struggling, creative, passionate, slightly fucked up, very fucked up in some cases, people who were incredibly good at what they did and just wanted to be heard. And that was one of the most exciting things was Alex would, have these people who were local. I mean, so many of the artists were actually
Hotel Cafe, if you know the Hotel Cafe.
out of California. And
Yep.
it was so exciting to know that people were getting work and getting, remember Portions for Foxes? These things that, I could go on, but
Yay, Rilo Kiley.
I'm like, oh yeah, like it's one of the first songs we place in the show. It might be the first one. And from the moment you hear that song, you go, oh, Dorothy, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
Right. Yeah, it was hand knit. It had a quality to it that we looked for,
Yeah.
which was a little off kilter and a little unexpected. And I think that's the through line for a lot of the music.
Okay, and which leads me to something I've always been curious about, which is what makes a Shondaland show song, right? I think like there's this thing where at a certain point, yes, you're finding great music, you're putting it on this great show, and then music sort of becomes this bigger thing, and marketing people are reaching out to you, all this sort of stuff. And then at that point, are there attributes to the music that you're seeing threads with what you're picking, or is it really just unique to the experience of the episode and what you're looking for when you're placing something on an episode of a show?
What I would say is every single show is different. Yeah. So every single demand is different, and therefore every sound tends to be different. So if you look at, Grey's, the music organically came from the feeling that we wanted young, raw talent and the sound to be more raw, and that there was longing imbued in it, and fury, and kind of
A lot of female vocal.
That was a big thing, given, I don't know, we were women. And you never got to hear enough women, so it's like we were big fans of, women. We love men too, but, for music, it was super great. And I think somebody had asked me this earlier, is there anything that, all the Shondaland shows have in common? And just that they're Shondaland shows, and that every single one of our shows, I think, has a very distinct musical identity. Private Practice, we skewed our music older because those were characters who were at a key point in their life where they were trying to make decisions as to whether or not they're going to have babies. People were dying, whether or not you're going to keep a job. It's a different kind of dilemma than people in Grey's Anatomy are at. So you started digging into like some people that we knew, but with new music, like when Mary Kay Blige did the Double Addiction series of episodes. There are 2 episodes about Amelia becoming a drug addict. And that's just one example of a lot of the people that we got to place who we never would have placed necessarily on Grey's, but were perfect for Private Practice. Scandal was an entirely different thing because Shonda heard in her head on Scandal a particular kind of music that she wanted, and it was music that you would recognize, partially because we're introducing a world you don't know anything about, which is fixing, it's being a fixer. And there was something about making this sort of fun, comfortable sound at the same time bringing in the Album Leaf theme for Live in Fits.
Yeah, I think to just
Hit it.
add on to, I'm just going to hit it. I think music is often a character in Shondaland shows.
Always.
And it has a space. The writing makes space for it, the way you edit it, and it's directed. There's sort of always space for music, also space for silence, which is an equally, important part of storytelling. I think to your point, Grey's has an identity. Scandal definitely a completely different identity, but we use music as sort of joyfully and as intentionally on Scandal as in Grey's. Obviously we dug into the most iconic R&B and, 60s, these amazing Aretha and Stevie and Miss Ross and, just sort of gem after gem. For me, just to be bald a little bit, one of the big challenges was making sure we got all the music cleared for our budget and on time. And these were artists that didn't always clear for television, but they wanted to clear for the Shondaland show. And it was pretty heady to be able to turn around these amazing tracks. Stevie Wonder wrote an original for the Scandal finale. Yeah, it was a big deal. 2 weeks after Prince tragically passed away, we paid homage to him with a song on Grey's and on Scandal. And I think it's a testament to like the way Shondaland respected music so much and enjoyed it, that we were able to ask the estate, which was obviously it was a difficult time for them, and we were able to get those two songs. So many amazing moments.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something.
Oh, no, I was going to give a shout out to How to Get Away with Murder, which has an entirely different sound to, and that was Pete Nowak, who created the show and who knew that what we needed was a darker, sort of a sinister club sound, is the best way I can put it.
A lot of
And-
remixes, a lot of European stuff.
Yeah, and it was much more exotic. And I remember people first listening to that show going, "This sounds totally different." I'm like, "It's about murder." It's in the title.
And then, I mean,
Sorry. I know. Try living with me. Sorry, honey.
but it was, no, when you were listing off artists, and there are a lot of artists, particularly, I mean, for my question went down for Grays that folks remember, and you were mentioning a lot of stories with different artists. I'm curious about the response over the years from folks whose music you've placed on television, right? Like, are there stories looking back that you were like, that stand out to you from, I mean, there's so many songs and so many artists, so if anything kind of bubbles to the top.
Okay, so for me, okay, so in 1999, I became aware of this group called Gomez, who we did place on Grays. You would probably recognize this couple of songs that we placed.
How We Operate.
How We Operate was one of them. And I was obsessed with Gomez. They were this British group. They won the Mercury Award the year before I think Coldplay did. And they were really scraggly, and I loved their music, and I loved their sound, and I was like a super weird fangirl, and totally age-inappropriate fangirl, if we're going to be super honest about it. And one of the greatest things for me was we got to this place on Grays where this album was coming out, and I really, really wanted Gomez to have a song on the show. And we kept sort of putting, we put them on our comps, and Shonda would listen to them. We both kind of go, not right, not right. But the most exciting thing to me was we started picking Gomez, and Gomez was so excited that they came here and I think recorded an album, and I could listen to them record the album. I was so starstruck, and it was so cool. And then the coolest thing was, practically in my entire life, my then boyfriend, now husband, hi honey, he's here, and Alex, at Alex's house, had a surprise party for me that was, I didn't know what it was, and Gomez surprised me and performed at my birthday party.
Pretty sneaky.
Pretty freaking snaky. And yeah, that was pretty cool.
Alex, do you have one, or?
I don't have a good birthday party story. No, I think it's so hard to, so many amazing moments over the years. I sort of talked about the Prince. So many artists have become friends. I remember seeing Brandi Carlile, very early on, and understanding what the story might be. Like listening to her perform it, I think there was 3 of us in the room, and you just have those feelings sometime when you understand you are in the presence of someone, at the very beginning of somebody's amazing journey. And I have a lot of stories like that, and I'm lucky to have so many stories like that. And it's because I got to work on Grey's. It's because I got to work on Scandal that I have those stories.
Absolutely.
I got a lot.
And then on the thread of music, of course, as we're talking about here today, one episode folks love to talk about is the Grey's Anatomy musical episode.
Yeah.
People have lots and lots of, people had a great, strong reaction then. They talk about it a lot now, And so the question I have for both of you is, what memories sort of stand out from making that, having that come to television, and sort of the way in which it's resonated with folks and stayed with folks over the years?
You have more than I do. Shonda wrote it, right? And who directed it?
Who's Tony?
Tony Phelan directed
Tony
it.
Phelan
Of course
directed it because he was the big, he loved to direct and he loved musicals. And, the thing for me was Sada Ramirez, I think. It's the Sada Ramirez cover. That's the thing that I think.
She did the story, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It was her cover of the story that's my biggest memory of it. I remember trying to explain to the network what we wanted to do. That's a whole nother story, they were kind of confused and I think a little concerned. But it came out really well.
Yeah. I think what I remember is siphoning through. I think this was season 7, if I remember correctly. So we had 6 seasons. As I said before, we probably did 6 to 8 songs an episode on Grey's. We had a lot of songs to pick from, but we wanted to make sure, obviously, they could be sung well by the cast members. So not everybody can sing every song well, and that they were really meaningful to the show. And just that process of narrowing down, which is sort of like making an album, where you look at your season's worth of songs. How will you make sure that it's great songs, but big fan moments, but it's listenable outside of watching it? And I think probably a lot of that had to fit the story. It had to make sense as far as the kinds of songs that they did. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
And then I guess this is more of a general one, so if you want me to be more specific, I can be, but I'm sort of curious what bubbles up for you in terms of, particularly on Grey's, but also lots of Shondaland shows, there are these really huge moments, right? It's the ones that everyone's talking about, in the days of Scandal, we're all tweeting about it, all this sort of stuff. And so I'm curious about when you think of, if one comes to mind, building what is going to be a big moment in terms of the story, and how you meet that when it comes to music. Or is it different? Is there sort of an added energy or pressure to knowing this moment is going to be big and you have to find some sort of way to bring it to life through music as well?
I think that's reverse engineering, because I think that's anticipating that something's going to happen, and that means that you would be scoring for an audience who haven't heard it yet. So the only way that I think we can work is it's always about how we feel.
Yeah.
Grey's Anatomy got made because we both wanted to make a show that sounded like us and was something that we would watch. And we just had this feeling that if we would watch it, maybe somebody else would watch it too. And I think it's the same thing with music. It's if Shonda writes or Pete Nowak writes or, William Davies writes, it's Paul William Davies writes, then you try to find something which speaks to that moment the best you can. And I don't think we think very much about the reaction to it. We just stay in the moment of what it is you're trying to communicate. And sometimes the strongest, biggest moments we've had, silence works incredibly well, and sometimes music works entirely well. So it's all about how do you, if you feel like a moment is a gigantic storytelling moment, what is the most effective way to make people feel it? And sometimes it's music and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's sound. We've used sound for things too. And that's an incredibly important part of the show too.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was always surprising, especially to people in the record business, people in the publishing business, that we weren't reverse engineering, that it was really about these small, dark editing bays and maybe one song got tried and it was right away. Maybe there was 60 or 70 or
Oh,
hundreds
there
of
were
songs.
days. Oh my
right?
God, where
That
we would sit there for days
and try to find the right
and
thing.
just place and just place and just place. It was, yeah.
And so all those things happen, but they don't happen because that person has that many followers or that had that many fans. It's like effective storytelling, to me, musically, is about the right song in the right place.
It is. And the one other thing I'm going to say, which is just bizarre, is when you find the right song, I've always found personally, when I find the right song, I know it's the right song because you don't really need to edit it. Like, weirdly, the right song, 9 times out of 10, very often what you have to go through is you have to go through and sort of edit or figure something out or move things. When it's been right for me most of the time, you put it in and it plays. And it hits the moments without you knowing it's going to hit the moments. And when I tell you, it's one of the most magical, incredible things to be in the process of and to be just in the presence of, because it's like something else is doing it for you. And that's really cool. Wouldn't you say? It's like you just know it.
When you know, you know.
God, and then I want to sneak in one thing that has popped into my brain before our last question, which is there an example of a moment that I feel like I would remember things that were really hard to find the music for in my brain, but I also have not been doing it, so that's come out of nowhere. The question in that is there an example of one that you like went through song after song and were like, we're having trouble finding the right song for this moment, right? Like, not reverse engineering, but like, is there one that stands out to be like, oh, this is hard to figure out? Which might be too daunting of a question, but
I think we should tell the story of how the Sleeping at Last cover of Chasing Cars ended up, like right? Like it was going to be another song.
That story.
It's a good story though. We had to had to turn it around in a day.
Basically what happened was we did have a song, and it's
Lovely.
It's Derek's, spoiler alert.
Derek died.
There's a truck. It's a thing. And it's this, we knew that's a moment where you have to have something to answer your question directly as opposed to rambling. That was something where we knew we had to have the right thing. You knew to have the right thing. And we had something, and it was good.
And I sent over a cover of Chasing Cars that was intended to be for the episode that was the following week, like episode 20, not 19. And I sent it over to Shonda and to Betsy. I was like, yay, I think we have something great. And then what happened?
Come in the morning. It's Thursday. Grey's Anatomy airs on Thursday. It's Thursday morning, and Shonda runs into my office and says, "Can you come into my office, please?" So I come into her office, and I'm like, "Uh-oh." No. It usually means like there is something urgent. I was like, "Okay." I come in, and she goes, "Okay, you got to watch this. And she presses it, and she's had it placed in this
scene that's going to air that
night. And I start crying, and I go, not because it's airing that night. At that moment, because it was really moving. Later, I cried because it was airing that night.
Me too.
And I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And she looked at me, and she said, Can you get this in the show?" She does this really well, by the way. And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I can get this in the show." I go into that room, immediately pee, call you.
I also immediately
we also immediately urinated.
So
and then this process started, which you have to sort of picture it happening in fast motion.
So you see the people flying down the hallway, the doors are,
screaming.
So Sleeping at Last covered the song. So we knew we had that piece of the song cleared. Also at the same time, the talk is clicking. The clock is ticking.
That too.
And Snow Patrol's management were on flights, international flights, and at a baseball game. And it's a story and so I was frantically, and I mean frantically, trying to get an approval. And I knew we could get the approval if we reached them, but you can't just air a song without approval. And back to you.
And so basically, we're running. I'm on the phone. I think that was one of the times I was on the phone with the head of the network going, hold it, hold it. And when there was somebody in New York, where it airs on the East Coast first, who was like sitting there, and we got down to 15 minutes before it aired. And Alex finally got some like guide. And when I tell you, like,
Thank you, Q Prime. Thank you.
we got that through, and it aired in New York, I think, and then, or it aired in California. It didn't air in New York. It didn't make it to New
We
York.
didn't make it East Coast.
We didn't make it East Coast, but we made it West Coast, and then it was inserted in for perpetuity. But that was the biggest
We remember that moment.
nail biter, and we've had nail biters. I mean, we've changed things around. We've edited 24 hours in a row. We've done that kind of stuff. But this was like really proud of that.
Cuckoo bananas.
It was cuckoo bananas.
It was great. It was awesome.
You were like unbelievable. I mean, if you wanted to invade a country, she's my ride or die, man. There you go.
I mean, I could sit here and ask for random stories forever, but I do want to end on one note, which is one thing we know about both of you is you have incredible taste in music. And yes. And so, placing songs, making great TV, all that aside, I do sort of want to ask, like, who are folks that y'all are listening to? So the audience here can like listen to it on the car ride home or whatever, just to give folks a sense of like what it is that you're in this moment having on in your rotation, as they say.
I wouldn't be surprised if we're listening to. I've dug back into my comfort food.
Me too.
And I bet we have the same sort of. I wouldn't be surprised if we're listening to sort of the same stuff. I'm listening to Lee Hazelwood and Nancy Sinatra.
Me too. Dusty Springfield.
A lot of 60s, cold, yummy weather, comfort food stuff currently.
And I'm also listening to, and this is partially, I've always loved jazz, and Paul Davies loved jazz. So Ben Webster, who's a really smoky jazz sound, and the other side of it is like Sonny Stitt, and so it's been sort of a range. And we also we go to this restaurant in New York where they make these incredible restaurant playlists, and I begged the manager to let me take them on Spotify. So I've been kind of being much more introduced to stuff that I wouldn't normally listen to by just listening to these random playlists, which are great. And also, by the way, of course, we're listening to Kylie Minogue.
Yes, we are.
Clear. Listening to Kylie Minogue.
Got it. Alrighty. Well, that is our panel for today. Yes, give a round of applause. Everyone, please remain seated because we are going to have one last incredible musical performance, and that will be by Anya Marina, a gifted singer-songwriter and live performer whose music has been featured in Twilight, Gossip Girl, 13 Reasons Why. The deluxe version of her 6th studio album, Asteroid, will be released in June, and tonight she's going to perform 2 of her hit songs that were featured in Grey's Anatomy, Miss Halfway and Clean and Sober. So we are going to step off. We're going to have her come up and enjoy the rest of your night. Let's give Betsy and Alex one last round of applause. Thank you.